With the premiere of the documentary Hal at this year's Sundance Film Festival, I decided to make a video about the less talked about second half of the master's career. Hal Ashby, who was not only one of the best directors of the 70s, with Peter Biskind, author of Easy Rider's Raging Bulls, a great book about the Hollywood New Wave, said that Ashby, in the 1970s, had one of the best directorial runs of perhaps any director, but also is one of the greatest directors of all time. Ashby started out as an editor, particularly for director Norman Jewison, editing Jewison's pictures such as The Loved One, The Cincinnati Kid, The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming, In the Heat of the Night, for which he won his only Oscar, The Thomas Crown Affair, and Gaily Gaily, but this one uncredited. Ashby's directorial debut came with the brilliant The Landlord, being a script Jewison was too busy to work on and gave to Hal to make. After Ashby's incredible directorial debut, the now director released Harold and Maude, The Last Detail, Shampoo, Bound for Glory, Coming Home, and Being There, all through the 1970s, and all being either perfect films or masterpieces, except for 76's Bound for Glory, which was simply a great but commercial biopic about American folk singer Woody Guthrie. Most of Ashby's films, except for the revolutionary Harold and Maude, earned great reviews and Oscar nominations. In fact, Ashby directed 10 different actors to Oscar-nominated performances: Lee Grant for The Landlord, Jack Nicholson and Randy Quaid for The Last Detail, Jack Warden for Shampoo, the entire cast of Coming Home, being Jon Voight, Jane Fonda, Bruce Dern, and Penelope Milford, and Peter Sellers and Melvyn Douglas for Being There. Lee Grant, Jon Voight, Jane Fonda, and Melvyn Douglas won Oscars for their performances. Hal Ashby's masterful movies of the 1970s fronted the creativity of the Hollywood New Wave. With such a powerful and successful body of work behind him, what was it that made Ashby lose his touch and ultimately fail as a director in the 1980s, resulting in one of cinema's most tragic and shocking downfalls? Hal Ashby's first film, that was released in 1980, was Secondhand Hearts. This film was actually made in '79, and thus, unsurprisingly, it is actually quite good. The film stars acting greats Robert Blake and Barbara Harris, and is about the two getting drunkenly married and end up attempting to make the marriage work, with the first step being hitting the road to get the high-spirited Barbara Harris's kids back from her previous marriage, who now live with her ex-in-laws. The best thing about this odd picture is the performances of Blake and Harris, who deliver great, energetic, expressive, and lively performances. Blake plays a meekish character, which provides great contrast to Harris's lively character. If comparing this picture to a previous Ashby one, Harold and Maude fits it best. Although the difference between the two pictures is that Harold and Maude is a perfect film in every aspect of filmmaking, whereas Secondhand Hearts is not. Ashby's rare 1980 film is quite uninteresting to watch, and nothing that happens actually captivated me that much personally, except for Blake's and Harris's performances, although one can argue that it is simply the presence of such great actors acting well in this movie that makes it good, and not Ashby's directing. However, I feel that the grip of Ashby was still fully holding this movie together, unlike his following films, which I will get to shortly. The film is simply just not that interesting, and instead is quite weak and boring. The most and perhaps only moment that actually affected me whatsoever, apart from the whimsical and over-the-top comedic performances of both the main actors, is the Blue Bird montage scene that can be conveniently found on YouTube, being the only video footage of the film on the internet, to my knowledge. However, Tarantino is a fan of this picture, and he showed his personal 35mm print at the Lumiere Film Festival in Lyon, France in 2013. After the still decent Secondhand Hearts, but which is still nothing compared to his 1970s pictures, comes Ashby's evident downfall. Having always been a maverick and a contrary person, success became difficult for Ashby to handle. Due to his dependence on drugs and a reclusive lifestyle, the director became unreliable. Ashby released a Rolling Stones concert film called Let's Spend the Night Together in 1982, on which he collapsed on the set of in Arizona. Apparently, although he recovered, he was never again the same after that. He began spending too much time editing his films that a couple of projects had been taken away from him to be edited by others. Although trying to straighten himself out, in the 80s, many considered the once master to be unemployable. Although Let's Spend the Night Together is a fun film, as it literally captures the Rolling Stones performing at the Brendan Byrne Arena in New Jersey and at the Sun Devil Stadium in Arizona. And the filmmaking and editing choices were already quite shockingly bad. The editing has no narrative motivation whatsoever, and it cuts from the concert to unnecessary filler footage of the Vietnam War and the Rolling Stones at a younger age. The film at parts jumps to an unnecessary backstage footage of the band simply hanging around and not even doing anything interesting, unlike the profound interviews and hangouts with the band in Scorsese's The Last Waltz. Although the film was not edited by Ashby but by Lisa Day, it was the director's own fault that the film turned out mediocre due to him getting his own editing privileges removed. Once again, this film, unlike The Last Waltz, is just a concert and there is no director's touch in it whatsoever. That same year, Ashby released Looking to Get Out, which in my opinion is his worst film. The picture is about two gamblers who must leave New York City after one loses a lot of money, and looking to turn their luck around, the two rush off to try and earn their money back in Las Vegas. Perhaps the only good thing about this movie is the screen debut of Voight's daughter, Angelina Jolie, who was 6 at the time. For me, the worst thing that can ever be about a movie is if it is uninteresting to watch. Watching Looking to Get Out, I was completely uninterested in anything that was happening, practically almost to 100%. Probably not Al Schwartz's and Jon Voight's best work, being the two screenwriters who wrote the scripts. Although there are no atrocious faults in this film, and every aspect of filmmaking is quite normal, the film just didn't captivate me at all. What is scarier is that I watched Ashby's cut of the film, and not the original studio-cut theatrical version, which says a lot about the director's true downfall. The picture was both a critical and commercial failure at the box office. In 1984, Ashby made yet another concert film of Neil Young. The concert was recorded at the Hara Arena in Dayton, Ohio, on September 18, 1983, during Young's solo trance tour. I have actually not seen this picture, as it only exists on rare laserdiscs, and I have yet to get a copy of it. Ashby's next film was 1985's The Sluggers Wife, which was surprisingly okay. This is mainly, if not fully, due to it being written by the great Neil Simon. The film is about a Major League Baseball player who marries a beautiful woman who becomes his muse, and his only way of batting home runs at the ball games, meaning she must be present at every game. However, the two have different goals, so they separate, which jeopardizes the player's baseball career. The first half of this film is quite funny. It contains witty dialogue and witty scenes, and the performances of Michael O'Keefe, Rebecca De Mornay, and Martin Ritt stand out. The second half turns quite weak, average and uninteresting, particularly script-wise. This was one of the few scripts that Neil Simon wrote directly as a screenplay, and not as a play first. One big fault of Ashby's is that he underuses the acting talents of his own veteran, Randy Quaid, as well as of Cleavant Derricks, who both play incredibly minor characters. The Slugger's Wife was also a total critical and commercial failure. 8 Million Ways to Die was the final theatrical feature film of Hal Ashby. Released in '86, the picture is about an ex-detective, played by Jeff Bridges, who shoots to death a violent suspect during a narcotics raid. The psychological aftermath of the shooting worsens his drinking problem, and his alcoholism causes him to lose his job as well as his marriage. Bridges meets a mysterious stranger during one of his AA sessions, who draws him back into the world of crime. Trying to help a beautiful prostitute to get out of the business, the woman gets murdered, and Bridges cannot resist but to solve the crime, all while resisting his temptation to return to drinking. 8 Million Ways to Die is actually quite good, because it's bad. The film also stars Rosanna Arquette, Randy Brooks, Alexandra Paul, and Andy Garcia, the latter of which gives a hilarious performance as a Hispanic big-shot drug dealer and said playboy. All 5 performances by Bridges, Arquette, Garcia, Paul, and Brooks are hilarious not because of the actors themselves, apart from Bridges, whose innate Big Lebowski attitude is present in all his roles, but because of the terrible dialogue Oliver Stone and R. Lance Hill wrote for them, based on Lawrence Bloch's novel. It is scary to find out that the great Robert Towne, who wrote masterful scripts such as Chinatown and Ashby's own The Last Detail, among many others, had an uncredited contribution to this awful screenplay. Apart from the fact that Jeff Bridges' character's actions make no sense, an incredibly funny thing about this film is the completely untimed and awfully and illogically directed interactions between characters. This film consists of quite a few motherfuckers set at each other coming out of nowhere, and it is shockingly hilarious. Garcia's performance is hilarious as well, because he plays such a said show-off badass, but the dialogue he says and the way Ashby directed him is simply awful. One seriously great thing about this film is the score by James Newton Howard, a stylish, moody, LA, atmospheric soundtrack, making one think of the scores of True Romance and Heat. 8 Million Ways to Die is a lot of fun, but because it's so bad, thus that's really not a good thing on Ashby's part. In 1987, Ashby directed one of the 3 produced pilots for the show Beverly Hills Blunts, a funny little pilot starring Dennis Franz, Peter Jurassic, Dana Wheeler-Nicholson, and Guy Boyd. Apart from the almost empty script with no real story, and simply funny moments within the narrative, this television turn for Ashby was far from the worst thing he's ever made. Ashby's final ever piece of directorial work was the 1988 TV pilot film Jake's Journey, a hilarious-looking creation written and starring Monty Python's Graham Chapman. This pilot was made for CBS, but didn't get bought, so the show ended up never getting made. What's worse is that no copies of this TV film exist, apart from in the Library of Congress, and apparently in the hands of 3 private owners. All we have is some clips from Jake's Journey on a TV Shows That Never Were segment available on YouTube. How I hope to one day watch this supposed gem. Hal Ashby developed cancer that spread to his liver and colon, and the great director of the 1970s died on December 27, 1988, at only 59 years old. This is one of cinema's greatest losses. Although the director made some terrible, questionable, and even okay movies in the 1980s, he will always be remembered for his 1970s movies and the way he changed cinema with them forever.